If you don't think the Welsh are fond of the English now, you should have seen what it was like in the 10th century. Despite the English, or the Saxons as they would have been referred to by their neighbours, having been on the island for about 500 years at this point, there was still a feeling in Wales and in culturally Brittonic places that they were the originals and the Saxons were this unwelcome and temporary blight on the land. A little example of this is in Asser's Life of Alfred. So in the 880s, Alfred had basically secured superiority and authority over the southern kingdoms of Wales. And it appears that Asser in his writings was trying to sort of reconcile the disgruntled Welsh people with Alfred the Great and say, look, this guy's actually really cool, he's holy and he's decent. Some of the little clues of it being aimed for Welsh people is in the fact that he will translate English place names into Welsh, but kind of not do vice versa. And he would also go into quite a lot of detail about politics and locations, which might have been obvious to West Saxons, but not necessarily obvious to the Welsh. But the focus of this video comes a generation later in the poem Armes Prydein. I think that's how it's said, but I know it's said in English, The Prophecy of Britain. Despite this being penned by an unknown author, it's by far the most blatantly anti-English, hate-fueled document that I've come across in my research from this period of time. It can be found in the Book of Taliesin, I think that's how it's said, which is from the 14th century, but it seems that a lot of the poems in there are from the 10th century or earlier. I am going to link in the description this book for you to get from Amazon, and it is an affiliate link, so if you do, I'll get a few quid. Maybe I'll get myself a haircut. But what it is a prophetic poem. It's writing from the future, a future where the Welsh and some allies have overthrown the Anglo-Saxons and cast them away from the land. So when is it from? It's pretty clear that it's from before 1066 because it's focused on getting rid of the Saxons, not the Saxons and the Normans. And it also makes remarks about the men of Dublin, separate from the Irish of Ireland, which likely means that it's from after the middle of the 800s, which is when the Vikings really got a hold of Dublin. So the poem prophesies the reconciling of the Cymry, Welsh, the men of Dublin, Vikings, the Gwyddil of Iwerddon, the Irish of Ireland, Mona, Isle of Man, and Prydein, Britain, Cornwall and Clydemen, Strathclyde, coming together to overthrow and dispel the unwanted Saxons. So this author is really trying to rile the people up, all people who just aren't the Anglo-Saxons, and he invokes some Celtic heroes like Conan and Cadwallader to highlight this sense of legend and past glory, and to give hope that that can be found again. But what really happened to make this Welshman so angry? The answer to that question might really narrow down when this poem is actually from. So during the reigns of Edward the Elder, 899 to 924, and Aethelstan, 924 to 939, the Welsh nobility seem really sort of under the thumb of these two kings and fairly happy to be so. Howell the Good, in particular, was a Welsh royal who submitted to Edward in 918. If I'm correct, he was kind of a petty king at first, but then sort of went on to inherit like a large portion of Wales. And in 928, he returned from a pilgrimage to Rome, and this is when he kind of sparked up a friendship or admiration of Aethelstan. And he seems to really, really admire English civilization. During Edward's reign, much of Britain had acknowledged his superiority, but it was Aethelstan who really made a push for this. Of course, he unified England in 927, channel name, but there are occasions where he's attributed the title of King of Britain, and he even minted at least one coin with that title on it. So when the poet is referring to a Mectern, I'm really not sure how you say it, Mectern, which is a great king, he's perhaps saying it in jest or sarcasm, but it seems that he's referring to Aethelstan. But the best clue for this great opponent being Aethelstan is when the poet states, "Stewards their taxes would collect, in the treasures of Cymru there was not that they would pay." So sort of taking a stance against some kind of taxation, and it seems pretty evident that the taxation that it's referring to was the extortionate yearly tribute that Aethelstan ordered the Welsh to pay to him, which consisted of £20 of gold, £300 of silver, 25,000 cattle, as well as hounds and hawks, any number of them at his leisure for him to be able to go hunting with. So that gives us the clue that it was around 930 that this poem was penned. If it was penned in 930, there was a pretty fascinating act of foresight on behalf of the author, or as we get onto later, he may have heard something about it, because in 937 there was indeed a coalition between Olaf of Dublin, Constantine II of Scotland, and Owain of Strathclyde, who teamed up together to take on Aethelstan at what became known as the Battle of Brunanburh. Though the prophecy from the poem appears to have fallen short in the way that Aethelstan wipes the floor with these opponents. Their armies were scattered, many kings, earls, and the son of the King of Scotland were found dead on the battlefield. Aethelstan had won a decisive victory. Although you may have noticed that from that coalition there was someone missing from it, and that was indeed the Welsh. So the King of Gwynedd at the time, Idwal Fol, was a regular at Aethelstan's councils, and then of course Howell the Good of Dyfed and Glywysig was more than happy to be a subordinate of Aethelstan, who did still suffer a large amount of losses in terms of men. If the Welsh had been involved, perhaps the tide would have been turned. So I think the poem is not only angry at the Anglo-Saxons, but also the weak Welsh leaders who were so willing to bend the knee to their Saxon overlords. The author appears to be a holy man, a man of the church, and it may have been through those kind of connections that he heard about some kind of coalition going on, and that would have allowed the poem to still have been written before 937. And he does include sort of Christian themes and wordings to sort of build up the idea that God is on their side and that God will get rid of the Anglo-Saxons. The poem does say, "The Trinity delivered us from time, former trouble." And funnily enough, at the end, the poet does say, "The Saxons at anchor on the sea always," which I take to meaning they're cast out to the sea, never to find a home ever again. So I just think this is a fascinating piece of literature, and there is historical context to this hatred of the English, and the kind of detective work behind figuring out when exactly it was penned is really cool as well. Of course, I don't know exactly when it was penned, and historians far better than me still don't know exactly when it was penned, but it's cool trying to figure it out. To my Welsh neighbours, I love you, and I hope we're friends, and to everyone, have a wonderful day and Godspeed, and please subscribe.